affects me, and it helps my heart a little bit. This is what I want to do. Nothing else really matters to me.
I had wanted to tell my brother's story. I wanted his life to mean something. I had no idea how I was going to do that. But I trusted, I knew that something would come about in time. You know, who would ever thought? Tragically,
Good morning.
How you doing?
I'm okay. How are you doing today?
Pretty good. Yeah. A friend of mine, Kev Drew, asked me one day to make a record with him. He just wanted to make a record. And I said I would, but I don't think I have any songs. But the weird thing is that I'd been writing about Charlie. So we made a record, and it's an attempt to capture the feeling somehow of trying to get home.
Good morning. I wish to acknowledge the land we gather on today at Upper Canada College. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of many peoples, including the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and many more, and more recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, the meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to gather and learn on this land. Today's assembly is to come here to discuss the film most of you watched this week, The Secret Path. But before we begin, we just want to acknowledge the terrible tragedy that happened in Quebec yesterday. Our flags are at half-mast for the school in solidarity for this terrible crime. Yesterday, the news was filled with stories of Canadians coming together to unify around this community and to support them. And I thought it was a great sort of show of support. One of those members of our government was interviewed on the news last night, and he was asked what can be done to stop, to prevent these kind of events from occurring. And his answer was very simple. He says, you need to step in whenever you see situations of intolerance. You need to speak up when you hear comments of racism, you need to make a difference. You need to be the one who makes that voice heard. And I thought that was words well spoken and words that connect to the story that we have been witnessing in your history classes over the last week. Mike Downie and Gord Downie have come here. Mike Downie has come here, but Gord and Mike together took a stand. They saw something that was a form of injustice, a form of intolerance from our history, our Canadian history, that had been overlooked, had been ignored. And they together tried to make a difference by producing this film and to come and to speak to all Canadians, but I think most importantly to the youth about the future of our relationship with our Indigenous population. So today I'd like to welcome Mike Downie to come forth and talk to you a little about the film, to give his connections and his understanding of this situation, and to answer your questions most importantly. I know we've spent a week together in all the history classes, and I know you've got some great questions. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mike Downie to speak about the secret path.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Gray, and thank you for inviting me here today. I'm honored to be here and to tell you a little bit about Secret Path and some of the things that my brother and I learned since we began the journey of telling the story, which probably started 4 years ago. I can tell you a little bit of background. That might be a good starting point. I heard about this story of Channy Wenjack. At the time, it was Charlie Wenjack. That's the sort of Christian name he was given at the school. His parents gave him the name Channy, so you'll hear Channy or Charlie. It's the same. His family, his sisters still use Charlie. They don't really worry too much about that. But I first heard the story on the radio. I was driving in my car and listening to the CBC. And there was a very short radio documentary that had come out of by a reporter, Jodie Porter in Thunder Bay. And she told really the simple story of a boy who's 12 years old, Ojibwe, who had run away from his school, Cecilia Jeffrey, in Kenora, and tried to walk home. And it was sort of his residential school. And I remember listening, thinking, residential school, I really don't know what that is. I mean, I think I know what it probably is, but I don't really know what an Indian residential school is. So, I'm listening, and then she mentions that he's trying to walk home 600 kilometers, 400 miles, in late October, in wearing not much more than what you folks have on right now. He was in a light windbreaker, and I'm sure a lot of you guys have been up north. It's cold. So there he was, walking along the tracks. In my mind, I could see this boy. My son Will was 12 at the time, and I could see a boy walking along the tracks, and it hit me over the head. I thought, my gosh, the determination to try to get home. What was he running away from? How bad was it that he would take that kind of chance, that he would try to do that? So that was the beginning of a journey that I started. I told the story to my brother the next day. We went out for lunch, and over lunch we decided that we were going to try to tell the story to the country. And we really didn't know how, but we knew that we wanted to try. We saw it as make a film, and when I say a film, I mean a live action film. And so we sort of started down that path, and we reached out to a couple of writers that we knew. We asked if they would take the information. I'd managed to produce a research package, gave a lot of background. There was an inquest into his death back in 1966, into 1967. And an article in Maclean's magazine. So there's quite a bit of information about Channy. So anyway, we wanted to find a writer, and we reached out to a couple people, and while we were waiting to see what might happen, Gord, my brother, started writing poems. As you may know, he's a singer, he's a songwriter, and he went through the material, he started writing poems, which I thought would have no significance whatsoever. I have to admit it. Gord told me he'd written the first poem. I went, that's great. What are we going to do with a poem? We need a book. We need something to build a story around. And then he told me he'd written a few more, and I just didn't see it. It's funny, you know. I think we all like to imagine what we know, what opportunity looks like, and there it was, and I was looking right through it. I didn't see it. Didn't have my heart open, I guess. Anyway, by the time he got to 10, he'd written the whole story of Channing running away from the school and trying to get home, and you all know what happened. He doesn't make it. So those poems became songs, 10 songs. Now there was a record. It's like, oh, this is interesting. We weren't going towards the movie, but we were going somewhere. And then the 10 songs became a graphic novel when Jeff Lemire came on board and was equally moved by the story and created these incredibly powerful images. And then the songs and the graphic novel were put together, and we created an animated film for CBC after we told them the story. So this path has been a very circuitous path, and I think it's instructive, because I think sometimes when we set out to do something, we think we know how we're going to do it. We can sort of imagine what the end product is. The funny thing is that if we keep our minds open, and if we talk to the right people, in our case, the right people come along, you can get to somewhere more important that maybe wasn't your original intention. But you have to keep your mind open, you have to keep your heart open to what it is you're trying to do. What we were trying to do is tell the story. I think what we've ended up with something that is, quite frankly, it's an art piece. It's documentary, but it's done with song instead of live action, except off the top, the documentary parts, when we went up to visit Channing's sisters and their family to tell them what we had done. The rest is animated. But there's a power there, because I think it stops us from processing it like just information. I think the music and the art, the animation, kind of enters the head and the heart at the same time. And it makes us really think. It can make us really think. And I think it's important for a story like this that we really try to imagine. This is what my brother did. This is what I didn't realize that he was doing when he was writing the poems. He was internalizing what had happened. You can read it, and you can try to understand it. But when you internalize it, that's something else. You take yourself inside the story. You imagine what it's like to lie in a dormitory with a bunch of other kids who have been plucked out of their home and put into a residential school, where they've had their hair cut off, where they've been forbidden to speak in their natural language, their native tongue, and where they're beaten if they do step outside of those kind of rules. Like all of us, you know, our family is really, I mean, we like to think that our family's just there when we need them. But of course, our family is really in everything we do. And if you get separated by that, and if you're forced to be separated by that, it kind of changes the way that you're going to experience the world. And that's what was happening to these kids in the school. So for my brother, writing the poems was his way of putting himself in that position, putting himself out on those tracks in a windbreaker, in the rain and the freezing rain. And I think that because of that, there's a certain power. There's a certain power that is opened up to something like this. So that's on the project kind of side. For me, I've never been involved in something like this. I make documentary films, mostly. And documentary films are really, you're trying to find interesting ways to move hopefully information, often important information. I do a lot of environmental films and natural history films. But this was a very, very different experience for me. And what really has sort of resonated after completing it is you think about, I'm sure in your different classes with your teachers, you hear about a lot of things that are going on in the world, and social justice, third world development, places where there's a lot of complex issues that create a really terrible living situation. What's interesting with this story is a couple things. One, it happened in Canada. And it ran for over 100 years, and I know you know this. And it involved obviously 150,000 kids, over 150,000 kids. And everything that's happened since then to the Indigenous community can be traced back to these residential schools. It was the whole idea was to assimilate the children, to take them out of their culture. That, remember, the kids in this room, including myself, I'll include myself, that go the furthest back in this country, probably go back a little over 100 years. That's a long time. If you've got grandparents, great-grandparents, my great-grandfather came here just before the start of the First World War. If you go way, way back in this country, you're just cracking about 100 years, maybe over 100 years. This culture that we were trying to assimilate is thousands of years old. Thousands of years right here on this land. And when we look at the effects when we look at reserves today or Indigenous living off reserve, we see so many problems. The strange thing is that it's rare with a situation like that you can go back to one thing that connects it all. And it's residential schools, believe it or not. Residential schools broke the parent-child bond. Children weren't being raised by their parents. They were being raised by administrators, by staff, by the church. It changed everything. So when these kids went back to their reserve, and it was their turn to be a parent, they didn't have the experience of growing up with their parents. So you can see that becomes an intergenerational survival. You can see how it changes everything. So in dealing with a story like this, I think it's interesting that we have a wonderful country here. We have a rich history. We have a dark corner of that history. And what we hope is that this film shines some light on that. To me, it's a film that it's a good on-ramp. It doesn't get into all the terrible things that happened, of course, but it's a beginning. It's a beginning to sort of start to understand what has happened, what happened to this culture. And what we're seeing today, they stopped. Residential schools stopped. The last one was in 1996. But the effects keep coming. The effects keep coming because of the way that's impacted the generations. People have, as I said, intergenerational survivors means parents or grandparents even were raised in residential schools. And it affected who they were, it affected their ability to raise their own children. So, in many ways, I think this is, for my brother and I, this is a mini version of the truth. And the next step, of course, is how we figure out reconciliation, which is how we can move forward. Would you like to?
Yeah, if anybody has questions, we have a sort of limited time, so if you have any questions, you can put your hand up. I can you stand and deliver your question. Stand up, good.
How young would the children be going to residential schools, and how old would they be when they were allowed to leave?
Great question. Often the children were 6. Many started at 6, and they were in some cases they were They knew where they were and they came and got them. If the parents resisted, the father could be thrown in jail. And sometimes some kids were, I've heard firsthand accounts of just being picked up on the street on their reserve and taken off. And for many, they would go until they were, it varies. Many were, Pearl Wenjack, Charlie's sister, went till she was 18. And the year that he went off for his 3rd year, that was the first year she did not go with him, and that was the year that he ran away. So she was 18.
How was the animation made?
The animation was done, so basically the graphic novel created much of the plates. We had the characters already drawn. So basically, they take the original frames and they separate them. And so you would take the character off the page, if you will, and then that character gets animated and it goes back on the page. In many cases, we had to we didn't want to lose the watercolor effect to it, so it's not a full animation, it's a partial animation. In this case, 4 frames per second, which kind of gives it a little bit of a kind of a jerky look, but I think it kind of added up to something. Right there, yeah.
Why did the raven remove its eyes in the film?
That is a great question. You know, I can't tell you, except I know my brother told the animator the raven should have eyeballs hanging out of his beak. And I think in that whole thing with the paper bags, I think there's I think it's the idea of not being destroyed by what you see, or being destroyed by what you see. Because there's a few things that the eyes behind the paper bags are going black. So I think that is kind of the spirit being crushed in these kids. That's my interpretation. But if you've got another one, I'd love to hear it. But it's kind of awesome. Okay, you're standing in the white shirt.
If Johnny were here today, what would you say to him?
Sorry.
If Johnny were here today, what would you say to him?
Great. Wow. I think I would say. I think I'd say you were a brave 12-year-old. I think when I think about what he did, some part of me feels like he wasn't, even though he was unprepared. I don't know if he knew exactly what he was getting himself in for, but I think he knew what he was doing. I think he wanted more than anything to get away, and he wanted more than anything to be home. So I think he was a brave 12-year-old boy for sure. Right up here, yeah, sure.
How far did Jenny make it?
He didn't make it very far. There's sort of 2 parts. There's a cabin that he goes to with the other boys. I believe that's about 21 miles. Then they were there for a couple of days, and then he leaves on his own, and he makes it about 12 miles over 36 hours. But he's not well at the time. I mean, he has got something, cold or fever. So that whole 36 hours, he is he's getting weaker and weaker until he collapses on the tracks on October 22nd, 1966. Holy smokes, there's a lot of questions. Second row, right here, you guys.
What's the meaning of the raven in the story? Like, what is there a spiritual piece to it?
It's absolutely the raven. I think is basically the witness to all. So it is. I mean, there's a couple of interpretations you could have. The raven is the trickster for one, but I think we often misunderstand that the raven is the one who sees all, and it bears witness. And in this case, the idea of the huge raven and the small raven, I think that's all just part of Chaney's sort of path, that he's going towards something, and the raven knows what he's going towards, and he's kind of guiding him towards that, which is ultimately his death, but perhaps a return to his ancestors, if you will. So that's a great question. Front row.
How long would the residential school have been?
Sorry?
Would he have been able, if he got back with the residential school, would he have back?
If he'd made it home, more than likely. Kids ran away a lot. They ran away a lot. They were rounded up. There were a few that would eventually, I guess, be allowed to. You know what? Mostly they were rounded up and brought back. That was the whole idea. That was the whole idea, and the parents knew it. Right here?
Did many of them survive? Like, they ran away?
Oh yeah, no, I mean, there's a lot of kids died at residential school. I mean, every residential school built a graveyard beside the school, if you can imagine. They needed a graveyard. Like, when they planned it, they built it. We visited one at Cecilia Jeffrey. It was full of unmarked graves. That's absolutely horrific. Part of the project for Truth and Reconciliation to try to figure out how many kids are in these graveyards that are dotted across the country. But many of the kids who ran away didn't die. But a lot did. Channy's story is not exceptional. It's exceptional. It's not that rare, I guess I should say. Sorry, you've had your hand up for a while.
Since the residential schools are no longer running, what is the objective of the film?
Sorry?
What is the objective of the film?
Good question. I'd say primarily so that we understand what actually happened. And as I said, these schools may be over, but there's a long tail here. The effects of these residential schools are still being felt on reserves and off reserves. There's a feeling of, the social ills in these communities is huge. So much of it goes back to here. So this, ideally, this becomes a way of getting greater understanding. Somebody sees an alcoholic, Indigenous person who's a terrible alcoholic. You might think, geez, I wonder if that person went to an Indigenous school. I wonder if their parents did. I wonder if their parent was, a very good parent in the home, or were they shattered by their experience? So I think it kind of opens up our minds a little bit to what they went through.
Just got time for maybe one more question.
There's a gentleman in the back there with, right, yes, you've got, yes, you. No, you, yeah, I was, well, two. Take two. Go ahead.
How come you decided to start it with him walking down the railroad tracks? Is there going to be a flashback in the near?
Well, it does flash back to the school. I mean, the timeline is pretty straight, but I think just for the overall effect of really seeing a child walking along the railway tracks to that music. So that was just an artistic choice, really, to see it first. So, thick hair, yes, you.
How did this story change your view of Canada?
Wow, good question. Changed my view of Canada. It has changed my view of Canada, and I think in some ways we can be a little, I think we compare ourselves a lot to other countries, often the States, but other countries, and we don't see all of the problems that they have, all the race problems that they have, say, in the United States. And I think we can be a little bit quick to kind of pat ourselves on the back that we really, we sort of have this society that's above all that. This changes my image to know that, no, we do, because this system is based on racism. It's an old one, but it was carried forward for 100 years, based on a sort of similar idea that there's a superior race and an inferior race. So that changes my idea. But what I hope for the way I look at Canada is, I hope that our country, which is just celebrating 150 years, I hope that what we can do is we can reach back. See, when we built our country, we started it with Confederation. We pushed the Indigenous and the Native culture to the margins. We did not want anything to do with it. It wasn't incorporated into anything. And I'm wondering if there's an opportunity that we can bring some of their teaching and some of their ways, which are actually incredibly interesting, into our country as a kind of a national identity. You see it with New Zealand and the Maori. The Maori culture was also colonialized, but it sort of had a comeback there. And I know you've all seen the haka and things like that. But I do think for Canada, there's an opportunity for us to sort of build a country that recognizes that we're built on this 10 to 15,000 years of history, and how much stronger it could make us.
The school is going to be donating a check to the Channy Wendat Lord Downie Foundation, whose foundation is to pursue these ideas of trying to reconcile the situations and move forward, learn from our history, but move forward and to try and make this country and our Indigenous population a better place and a more positive relationship. So thank you, Mike, for all your